this has been called a hugely consequential elections in the United States, and I dare say it's not just going to be consequential for Americans, but also for the rest of the world. So here's my first question to you. If I were Chinese President Xi Jinping, who would I want to win? And the second part of that question, if I were President Bongbong Marcos, who would I want to win, and why?
Right, so these are very interesting but very complex and comprehensive questions that require comprehensive answers as well. Well, when we look into this from a geopolitical perspective, that of security and intersecting with geoeconomics, for instance, if you look at China, China would prefer perhaps, a Harris administration, particularly because it is still subject to change. And that is something that they have least experience with. They would rather see perhaps some sort of continuity with that is currently being demonstrated under the Biden administration. And they may have some reservations about the unpredictability of a Trump administration. But on the flip side, you could also say that the Biden administration has in fact been quite robust. Institutional building, security arrangement cooperation that has significantly impacted the security calculations of China. However, what we can actually see is that under the Trump administration, in fact, there were more robust policies as well that were largely pushing back against China's expansionist claims, particularly in the U.S. So in both scenarios, really, there are negative implications and perhaps some positive implications for Beijing. But of course, it will depend on the nature and the trajectory of structural conditions that would impact the region. And if you look into the Philippines, for instance, I'd like to say that the Philippine-U.S. alliance would remain relevant regardless of who is in charge. But of course, one important thing that we need to look up, of course, would be the nature of how we would deal with the United States, be it a Harris administration or a Trump administration. If we look into a Harris administration, we would see a relatively more continuity in institutional building. But at the same time, there is also that emphasis on the global South issue and addressing the U.S.-China power competition through capacity building. Right? But on the other hand, when we look into the Trump administration, we have to remember that it was under President Trump's administration that the MDT was clarified, the geographic scope encompassing the South China Sea was clarified during the visit of Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State. But of course, you have to look at it based on the transactional nature of Trump as well. This would mean that we would have to do more to ensure that the Philippines stays hot on the radar of the White House, to push for more arranged negotiations that would favor us and not give us a shorter end of the stick. So again, it's a matter of balance.
Well, some people are saying, Don. Sorry, this is Sean. But some people are saying, don't look to who will win, because either Trump, either Harris wins. Just what you said, pretty much we can expect continuity. But look at the majority in the U.S. Congress. What are your thoughts on that?
Right, and pleasure to speak with you as well, Sean. I hope you're doing well. Now, we have to understand that, of course, the Congress remains robust as a major check and balance to the overarching foreign policy institution of the United States. And in fact, it's not just the Congress, What certain American political scientists address and call as the blob, for instance, is the overarching institutional force field that continues to constrain the level of which U.S. foreign policy in particular could radicalize. So to say that, for instance, Harris or Trump would significantly radicalize and revolutionize U.S. foreign policy, I don't think that would be on the table, particularly because of the strength of the existing institutional makeup of U.S. national politics. So we would expect, at least for both potential candidates, to stay within their particular margins without significant radical shifts.
Okay, Don, let's talk about the Filipino Americans. What do you think are some of the possible factors that they will take into account or should take into account when they choose their U.S. president?
Well, right. I mean, there have been several reports that have actually highlighted the significance of Filipino American community in the major swing states or the areas of contestation. Nevada, for instance, right? So this is an opportunity as well for the Filipino American community to enhance their influence within the trajectory of U.S. national politics. But of course, like many other Asian American communities, there is a challenge here of maintaining a cohesive position towards a particular party, right? So that's the same for other Asian American communities as well. But from the last report that I've seen, I think there's more of that tilt towards the Democratic Party, for instance, among the Filipino American communities there. But of course, there is a lot at stake, particularly when it comes to issues of immigration, issues of socioeconomics. And then when it comes to the socioeconomic issue, I really feel that either president, has not really demonstrated a clear-cut plan on the socio-economic trends. So in that regard, it's something that we would still have to see how it would slowly unfold. But when it comes to the influence of the Filipino-American community, I think that the influence is now becoming more and more enhanced and realized, but it's a matter of mobilizing collective efforts as well to make that influence sort of operational at the national political level.
Harris's plan to raise up the middle class, that's not something that resonates with you because you mentioned that neither candidate, as far as you think, have really laid out a clear socio-economic agenda.
Reg, sorry, could you repeat that again, please?
I meant with Harris, she's talked about in the debate, she's talked about her plan to raise the middle class. And,
yeah, there's a bit of a static. I couldn't. Okay.
Okay.
Is this now it's good. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
perfect. Okay, so I was saying that Harris, during the debate, had talked about
Okay,
raising.
I lost you again.
Oh no.
All right. Yeah. Let's try one more time.
Let's try this one more time. So, I was talking about middle class in the U.S. and how Harris had talked about raising the middle class and providing more jobs, and whereas Trump has talked about cutting taxes for the wealthy. So with Harris, with the plan to raise the middle class, that hasn't resonated with you because you mentioned not really the uncertainty over both candidates' agenda, socioeconomic agenda.
Right. Thank you. And yeah, the socio-economic aspect is still relatively unclear. And well, raising up the middle class is in fact very important in society such as that in America, and that would be a huge significance. But if we talk about, for instance, Trump's prioritization of tax cuts, for instance, there are several economists that have actually cited the potential that could harm the U.S. economy more in terms of inflation, for instance, and all of that. And we have already seen, that sort of unfold in the past few years, for instance, where, well, under the Trump administration, if there would be a Trump 2.0, for instance, there's that idea to bring that back into the national economic plan of the United States. So there are, of course, speculations on whether this would actually do more harm than good for the national economy.
Okay, Don, I heard you use the word geoeconomics earlier, and I know you're a geopolitical analyst, but as we know, these things are often entangled in many, many ways. In terms of, slumping global growth, who would be the better U.S. president to handle all those headwinds and face them head on?
You're forcing him to show his political colors.
No. I mean, well, not necessarily, but we could look at it based on the level of commitment towards institution building at the economic front, right? So if we talk about global economy, what could channel and provide a positive stimulus for the global economy is to provide more pathways, more options, and more proactive measures that would allow states to actually be able to together reorient and diversify supply chains, ensure economic sovereignty in all these, right? So, but one issue is that under a Trump presidency, there are concerns whether the level of transactionalism would in fact impact the nature of global economic cooperation, right? And that is something that is concerning, given, of course, that there was this interview on Time magazine if I'm not mistaken, that Trump said the first thing that he'd do is cut off from the IPF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is one of the important contributions that has still not really formed and has not really matured, but has the potential in stimulating and providing more options to other countries of the Indo-Pacific vis-a-vis the growing asymmetry that these countries have with their relations with China economically, right? And of course, that is something that perhaps Kamala Harris may look into as she is trying to present herself as the voice of the global South.
Right.
For instance, when talk of the U.S. engaging with Africa, it was the vice president that actually went to Africa and engaged with the several countries there, despite the fact that it was President Biden who made the promises, right? So I think we could see that level of inclusivity. But again, it's still too early to tell. And depending, of course, on the overarching structural dynamics
Right.
that would unfold.
Right. Don, last question. Neither candidate was asked about this on the campaign trail, but what do you think their approach will be when it comes to Taiwan and the persistent question of whether or when China might take Taiwan could very well fall under this next administration. So again,
Right.
they
So,
painted vastly
I
different.
got the first part of the question, so I guess it's on Taiwan.
Yes. What do you think both
So,
candidates will do?
What we could actually think of is that of engagement that, for instance, the current Biden administration has. And while it is significant, there's still a lot of concerns whether that level of ambiguity would be a problem in the long run. Whereas when we look into a Trump administration, there are equal concerns of whether Trump may forego key areas of commitment, such as Taiwan, if, for instance, the US and China would be able to have some sort of robust economic arrangement that would be to the interest of the United States. So that these are some of the scenarios that may unfold. Under the Harris administration, more continuity that we are seeing under the Biden administration. So it's engaging with caution, and of course, continuously building on the capacity of Taiwan, for instance. So I think that would remain central under the Harris administration, given that the U.S.-China competition is also within her radius for the Indo-Pacific. But again, the level of transactionalism that Trump has brings out more caution whether it has the capacity to forego certain areas of Taiwan for economic gains. The America First positioning. So these are some scenarios that we could think of, but these are not the exclusive and the only scenarios, and it would have to unfold as we go on with the whoever wins.
Still lots of big questions out there. We're going to have to leave it there for tonight. We thank you so much for your time, geopolitical analyst and lecturer, Don Mclain Gill.